I was such a fan. He would come to, I grew up in Oregon, and he would come to, he was also from Oregon, and he would do conventions in Portland, and I would put on my flight jacket and my boots, and I would wait in long lines. I would write him long handwritten letters, illustrated, with drawings of his characters. He never got a restraining order or anything against me. He was very patient with me, and I'd get to the front of the line and nervously, shakily hand him my fan letters and ask him as many questions as I could. This was my attempt to draw a character I knew he would recognize. And he did. He said, "Captain Midnight." Yes, I did it. So, this was more the same. I was really into the X-Men. This is X-Men filtered through Frazetta. Even my signature down there at the bottom. And again, more. These are characters from Frazetta's comic called Thunder. So I really had no interest in animation when I was young, because I grew up in the 70s and early 80s, and it was kind of the dark ages for cartoons. What I had to watch in the mornings was Filmation and Ruby Spears, really limited, stiff, boring cartoons. They had no violence, no sex, nothing that a teenage kid would want to see, but that was all we had. But I never thought that was anything I would want to do. Let me open up some more art while I'm talking. These are some more comics that I did. I'm going to back up and go through this. In Eugene, I had a friend named Michael T. Gilbert. He was a professional comic artist, which was a really big deal to me to actually meet someone who made their living drawing comics. And he was really encouraging to me, and he liked my work, and he offered to do layouts for me to illustrate a comic for him, and I ended up doing 4 or 5 of them. I think this was probably around 1990, 91, so I would have been, I guess, real early 20s. And you can really, definitely wore my influences on my sleeve, even more than I do now. So this, I can tell I was looking at Wally Wood, Al Capp, who created Little Abner. I modeled the lead guy here on Walt Disney. The exciting stuff, the exciting part for me in doing this was, again, the inking using Zipatone, which are the dot patterns before computers, and I felt like a real artist when I would cut those little sheets out and place them on. I really enjoyed inking with the brush because I could add a level of polish to my stuff that would cover up a lot of poor drawing. And this is ultimately what I want to do. I want to, at some point, get back to doing comics full time. I think it's going to be really difficult because there's so much. Working in animation as a character designer, I've pretty much just done characters. I don't, backgrounds, layout, all that stuff is going to be something that I'm going to have to go back and be a beginner at, which is going to be a struggle. But I really want to do it. I've never given up on wanting to do comics. I don't even know if there's a market for it really anymore. But I think it was shortly after I did this that the movie Little Mermaid came out, and that really changed a lot. I'm not sure when that came out. It must have been around 90, 91, maybe
89.
90. Was it?
89.
Oh, was it that?
Maybe 88.
I remember even seeing the trailer. It was attached to a VHS of Bambi, and it just I don't know, it just hit me. Glenn Keane's animation, it just really hit something into me, and I knew that I gotta somehow figure out what that is. Why do I like that so much? Why is that triggering something in me? And I was also really into, probably shortly after that, the Don Bluth video games, Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, which I would play in the arcades, and I liked those because it was full animation that was marketed more to teenage boys, which was what I wanted. The Disney stuff was more of a family product, and I wanted to see a barbarian slicing monsters in half and seeing the guts and stuff inside of them, but in an appealing, cartoony way. And I even snuck in a cheap camcorder and had a friend play the game so I could videotape the animation. I was so desperate to get it and study it. So my artwork kind of transitioned from being heavily influenced by just comic artists and illustrators like Frazetta. Oh, that's getting ahead of myself. Into this type of thing, which is very Bluth, a little bit of Chuck Jones in there. The guy's little skinny legs is kind of that Chuck Jones nasty canasta kind of character. There's going to be some nudity in this stuff, so I hope everyone's okay with that. I would go to conventions in Portland and Eugene, and I would create little prints to sell. So most of this stuff was done for that purpose, to have something to sign and to sell for a couple dollars. Heavily influenced or swiped from William Stout, Dave Stevens, Frank Frazetta. That flower down there in the lower left corner is right off the cover of this book, Small Wonders by William Stout, that collected Frank Frazetta's funny animal comics. I'm basically doing the exact same stuff, just hopefully drawn a little more. I haven't grown out of the subject matter. Those are very Bluth monsters. And for some reason, I got obsessed with Al Cap, his drawing style. And Frazetta actually ghosted his little Abner strip for a long time. Maybe that's what attracted me to it. But I liked the cartooniness of it, the big, expressive eyes. And in the early 90s, I read an animation magazine, I think it was, that one of the Don Bluth's animators, and I don't remember his name, was going to hold a seminar, an animation seminar in Los Angeles. And I saved up my money, bought my plane tickets, rented my room in Los Angeles, and around that same time, I'd become obsessed with the Ren and Stimpy show, which had just started airing. And my life is sort of a period of obsessions with one thing or the other. And so I was buying these magazines that were coming out called Wild Cartoon Kingdom, and there were a few others that sort of showcased the Spumco animation studio, and they made it sound like this promised land of these cool, hip artists that were doing things in a way that I had read how things were done in the 40s and 50s in animation, and that I was so excited about it, and I wanted more of their work. I wanted their rough drawings, because I really had no idea how to draw. I had just gotten out of high school, and the way you kind of learn in high school, at least for me, is just memorization. You memorize what they tell you long enough to pass the test, and then hopefully you just forget. I just wanted to forget about it, because I wanted to think about X-Men and girls and all this stuff. So I think when I got out and I tried to figure out how to draw, I sort of applied that same idea, that drawing must just be memorization. You look at how someone does eyes, hair, figures, how they, and then just sort of store all that in your head, and then when you have to draw, you pull it all back out. And I've gone through most of my life trying to make that work. And it's only recently that I realized that wasn't working for me, and in fact it created a lot of anxieties, because I would sit down with my paper in front of me, and this rush of all this stuff would be just buzzing in my head with no organization, and I would just stare, and how do I start? I just couldn't understand it, and I would just sit there sometimes to feed it, and I would watch people draw, and it would just, I'd go to the comic conventions, and I remember one time watching this artist, Kyle Baker, draw. He was standing up, having a conversation, and just drawing like this. And I think he started at an elbow or something and finished this beautiful figure. And I just I didn't understand it. So it was really confusing to me. And I'll get back to that later. And if I forget, please remind me, because I want to talk more about that and ways that I've found to get past that, because I think it's been really important to me, and it's made a huge difference in my work and the enjoyment that I get out of doing the work. because most of my life it's been a painful struggle to try to figure this thing out. And I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any instruction. I didn't go to art school. I was in a fairly small town, and there wasn't a lot of, this is before the internet, so there weren't a lot of options for having someone kind of guide you through this. And I think what I did instead was I just started studying old artists. I thought, well, they've figured it out. Maybe if I look enough at their work, something is going to seep into me and I'm going to get it. And I think that explains a lot of my obsession throughout my life of collecting these artists, analyzing them, studying them. And I've gotten a lot of great things out of that. But it also was a little bit unhealthy, because what I was really doing was trying to take some of their magic, memorize it, and then sort of recycle it and cobble it together sort of as a Frankenstein monster drawing. Eyes from this artist, proportions from this artist, and the only thing of me that was coming out in that was sort of, I guess, how I put it together. But it always felt kind of dishonest to me. Like I never felt like I was really drawing. Like it wasn't flowing out of me. It was all memorization. So anyway, back to, I was gonna come to LA to study with these Bluth animators, and I had sent some of my drawings to Spumco. Their address was printed in a magazine. I sent a bunch of my drawings with a letter saying, I really love your guys' stuff. Can you send me some of your rough drawings that I can study from? And I gave my phone number, and then I kind of forgot about it. And I was getting ready for my trip, and I got a phone call one day from a guy named Vincent Waller, who was a director at Spumco. And he's like, hey man, we got your art, it's really cool. We really like it. You want to talk to John? And meeting John Crisfalusi, who was the president of Spumco. And so he puts John on the phone. He's like, hey, your stuff's good. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, because I'm surprised I actually didn't just black out. But, I told him my plans, that I was going to go study with the Bluth animator. He's like, what? So he said, why don't you come study with us? And okay. He says, you do it for free, and you, instead of learning a lot of bad habits, you can learn, we'll teach you. And so canceled my that class, and I went down and worked in Spumco for a month, and it was really an amazing experience. I'm really glad that Vincent's he picked me up at the airport when I got there. He watched out for me. He made sure that when everyone was going out to lunch, he said, hey, come on, we're going out to lunch. And even little things like, because I was such a rube, like I didn't know anything. I didn't know that you tipped people. I didn't know anything about being in a city or I just didn't. So he watched out for me. If someone cut in front of us at line, he'd be like, hey, we were here. And it was all like really good lessons for me. And John and all the other artists were the same way. John would come and he would spend time with me. He'd say, hey, come in, I'm gonna go over your stuff. And he'd open my sketchbook and it would be all this Bluth stuff. And he'd say, I'm gonna break you of these habits. And he would draw over my stuff, and there was another brilliant artist named Jim Smith there, and I would just go sit on the floor in his room and dig through his stacks of drawings, and the whole place smelled of his cigars. And to this day, whenever I smell that smell, it takes me right back to that time. There's a guy named Mike Fontanelli. There's so many good artists, and they were all so cool. Like, they treated me as an equal, even though I couldn't do any of what they were doing. And back then, it really felt like I had somehow gotten to be part of the cool club. And I was so not in high school. And so it was really a nice feeling to be around these people who had kind of had, my friend Glenn, hiding over there, described being at Warner Brothers in the early days as all of a sudden, you get to be one of the cool kids because you're around people who grew up like you, who had the same references, they liked the same stuff, you didn't feel like an outcast for the first time. It's like, okay, it's okay to be a geek, it's okay to to like this stuff. You don't have to go sit at the nerd table. It's all the nerd table. So, and I get to, I actually got to be friends with these guys. I'd go over to John Kay's house on the weekends and watch old movies. And at one time in the 90s, he was writing this really excellent series of articles on animation for Animation Magazine. They were really controversial, but they were also really exciting. And I remember one time he invited me over and said, hey, we're going to watch Chuck Jones cartoons and just kind of talk about them. So I went over there and he clicked the tape recorder and we start watching Chuck Jones cartoons. And he's like, what do you think about that? And we kind of talked about it. And I still, to this day, can't believe how I ended up in that situation, going from Eugene, Oregon, watching the Ren and Stimpy show, to being there, swimming in his pool and eating weird meats and sausages and stuff like that. So I really don't know why I've gotten to be so fortunate. And that's me with John on my last day. You can't really see the drawing, but he did this amazing sexy space girl for me. And he was forced to lay off a lot of the crew, and I ended up going back to Oregon for about 6 months. And around for the San Diego convention, John paid to fly me back out so I could be at the booth with him. And while I was there, I ran into Bruce Timm, whose work, actually I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm going to back up and show some art. Let's see what we get. Actually, I didn't bring any. You all know Bruce Timm's work. I don't need to show any. His comic Mad Love had come out around that time after I'd gotten back to Oregon after working at Spumco. I'd heard his name because he used to work for John Kay on Mighty Mouse and Beanie and Cecil. So I'd heard his name. I may be getting my timelines off here. It's just, I don't, even though I'm kind of obsessed with the past, I don't really think about my own very much. So I've had to kind of go back over the last few days and kind of remember a lot of this stuff. But he put out this comic Mad Love. It's one of the greatest comics of all time. And I just became an instant obsessed fan. And one of my goals in going to San Diego was I wanted to meet him. And I did, and I showed him my sketchbook. And while I was showing him my sketchbook, someone interrupted and showed him this really crudely drawn Harley head that was forged. And Bruce turns he's holding my sketchbook and he turns bright red. And I don't remember how the conversation went, but it was very like an interesting first meeting. But then he started looking through my sketchbook and he's like, this stuff's really good. And I don't know if we traded information or what, but I had seen at some of the original art dealers some of his pinup girls that he was doing, and they really blew my mind. And I told him how much I admired him, and it killed me when I would see him because I wanted to take them all home. I didn't have a cell phone. I couldn't snap a picture. I knew that I was thinking I'll never see these again, and these are the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. He said, "Oh, I'll send you copies of that stuff." So after I got back to Oregon, got a big package in the mail with an original Bruce Timm and a big stack of his comics that he had put these notations on, some of his roughs for some of his comics, and he wrote little things in the corners. And I got to know my friend Glenn, and I remember our first conversation, we geeked out about this artist, Roy Crane, and who did a comic called Wash Tubs. He's probably my second favorite comic strip artist after Charles Schultz. And I'd never been able to talk to anyone about this stuff. I remember I had some artist friends in Eugene, and when I showed them Roy Crane stuff, they looked at me and they said, "Oh, you're kidding. Do you like this stuff?" And they just didn't. They didn't quite get it. They eventually did, but Glenn got it, and it was really nice to be able to share passion. Like that's super important to me, and it's one of the great things about working in animation is you're around people who get you, who understand what you're talking about. Like your family probably won't, unless you're really fortunate. A lot of your high school friends probably won't, even if they really like you. They're not always going to get what you're saying, and that was huge for me. And Bruce called and said, "I want you to come work on Superman," which was just starting up. I think this was '94. So I packed up, came back to Los Angeles, and started working at Warner Brothers for Bruce and with Glenn. And It was super intimidating because I still didn't know how to draw. Like all I had were cheats, and these guys were so good. It was Ronnie Del Carmen. I mean, the whole crew, just, they'd go out to lunch with these little white pads and markers, and they just start drawing with no penciling. You know, whatever they would think, they would just draw. And I didn't understand that. And it was really, I really beat myself up for it. Like, my first day I got in, and I'm like, I'm supposed to start this job, and Bruce gives me this Jimmy Olsen turn to do. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, how do I turn this? So he'd come in and put paper over it, and he'd draw over it, and I'd kind of watch. Some of it would sink in, and but what really kind of helped was I would always do these kind of cute little cartoon women, and I'd sort of leave them out next to my really bad actual work. I kind of sprinkle them around my desk, and I'd come in and there'd be a note from Bruce like, I'm taking these. And we eventually worked out a trade where I'd leave them on my, it's weird with Bruce. I consider him a friend, and we would even we'd all kind of go out as groups to, you know, to lunch and to dinner and stuff. But he's real private. You know, I think he may be a little shy, or just he's a really private person like I was. So I'd leave my stuff on my desk, and I'd come in the morning, there'd be a stack of Bruce drawings, and mine would be gone. So he'd come in after I was gone and kind of see what I had, and give me a trade. And this went on for a couple years. I think I remember Ronnie Del Carmen saying in an interview one time that the girly drawings were the coin of the realm at Warner Brothers. So that made me feel good, and it made me do a lot more of that. And I imagine somehow psychologically it's why I did that. I got approval for it from someone that I admired so much.